The morning sun glimmered against Buckingham Palace, painting gold across the guards' red uniforms. Tourists laughed, cameras flashed, and then silence. A masked young man stepped from the crowd, clutching something metallic in his hand. No one knew his name. No one knew the chain hidden in his pocket, or the desperation burning behind his eyes. What happened next would turn an ordinary palace morning into a royal moment the world would never forget. It began as a prank, but it ended with a man gasping for breath, not from pain, but from the weight of his own choices. Before we dive into this emotional story of regret, redemption, and one soldier's quiet grace, take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and tap that bell icon. It really helps us share stories that remind us what humanity still looks like, even in uniform. And who knows, today's story might just change how you see viral fame. Forever. The sun had barely climbed above the spires of Buckingham Palace when the crowd began to gather. Tourists from every corner of the world lined the black and gold gates, clutching cameras and coffee cups, hoping for that perfect photo of the royal guards, the men in red coats and towering bearskin hats who never flinched, never smiled, never broke character. But one man in that crowd wasn't a tourist. He stood apart, half hidden in the morning haze. A black mask covered the lower half of his face, his eyes darting from the soldiers to his phone, to the small silver chain coiled in his jacket pocket. His name was Marcus, 24 years old, from a quiet town in Eastern Europe, and he was about to do something that would change the course of his life forever. He hadn't come for the guards. He'd come for the views. For months, Marcus had lived on social media, watching prank videos, daring stunts, and the endless flood of content that promised one thing: fame. He'd seen creators turn reckless acts into fortune, humiliation into headlines, and somewhere along the way he convinced himself that all he needed was one viral moment to escape his life of dull labor and dead-end jobs. So he packed a bag, sold what little he had, and flew to London chasing digital glory. Now he stood in front of the palace, clutching that chain like it was a key to salvation. In his head, it was simple. He'd walk up to a royal guard, toss the chain lightly around the soldier's neck as a joke, film his reaction, and boom, millions of views. A headline that would carry his name beyond the gray walls of his life. Only, Marcus had never met a man like Sergeant James Patterson. James had been a royal guard for 12 years, a soldier first, a symbol second. Beneath the polished uniform and emotionless expression was a man trained to stand still in chaos, to assess danger without moving a muscle. He had served in real war zones, seen what fear looked like up close, and yet, here he was, standing silent among the laughter of tourists. As Marcus studied him, doubt began to crawl into his thoughts. Was this really harmless? Would the guard even react? But then his phone, leaning against a wall, blinked red. The recording light was on.
He couldn't back out now. Marcus took a deep breath and stepped forward. His footsteps echoed on the cobblestones, loud in his own ears. Each one carried the weight of every foolish decision that had brought him here. His palms were sweating, his heartbeat racing faster than his logic could keep up. But adrenaline has a way of drowning reason. In one swift motion, he pulled out the chain. The silver links glinted in the morning light, sharp, cold, deliberate. He moved fast, looping his arm upward toward the guard's neck. For a split second, time froze. The tourist gasped. A camera shutter clicked. And then, movement. In a blur too fast for the eye to follow, James turned, grabbed Marcus's wrist, and twisted. The chain clattered to the ground. The young man's knees buckled as pain shot up his arm. Marcus's plan had lasted exactly 2 seconds. The guard's face didn't change. He didn't yell, didn't curse. He simply restrained the intruder with calm precision. Within moments, 3 other guards approached, boots striking in unison like thunder across the stones. Tourists backed away, whispering in shock. Phones rose into the air, capturing every second. The air that had been filled with laughter moments ago now crackled with tension. Marcus tried to speak, his voice trembling. It's just a prank. I didn't mean. But his words fell apart as panic took hold. He wasn't struggling because of the guard's grip. He was struggling because he couldn't breathe under the weight of realization. The fear, the shame, the collapse of everything he thought he'd gain. Captain Richard Morrison, the head of palace security, approached with a steady stride. His presence was commanding, his voice calm but unyielding. He didn't need to shout to control the scene. He looked down at the chain, then at Marcus's trembling hands. "Do you understand what you've just done?" he asked quietly. Marcus couldn't answer. His mouth opened, but the words tangled in his throat. He stammered about views, about online trends, about how he thought it would be funny. But even as he spoke, the absurdity of his explanation echoed louder than his voice. The captain sighed, a sound that carried both disappointment and pity. He gestured to one of the officers. "Call the Metropolitan Police. We'll let them handle this." As two police cars approached the gates, the murmurs of the crowd swelled again. People whispered, judged, recorded. Marcus felt every stare pierce through him like glass. He wasn't famous. He was exposed. When the officers took him by the arm, he didn't resist. He couldn't. The thrill that had once driven him now turned to a cold, hollow ache. He'd wanted millions of eyes on him. Now he had them, for all the wrong reasons. Before he was led away, he turned his head slightly. James Patterson was back at his post, motionless, composed, his rifle resting perfectly still. Marcus blinked back tears he didn't understand. The man he'd tried to humiliate had shown more dignity in silence than Marcus had in all his noise. The crowd began to disperse. The sun climbed higher, indifferent to what had happened. For most, it was just another palace incident, something to post, something to scroll past. But for Marcus, it was the end of everything he thought he knew about fame, and the beginning of a painful, unexpected lesson. The police car door shut with a heavy thud, a sound that hit Marcus harder than any insult could. Inside, the world felt smaller. The air smelled faintly of vinyl and disinfectant. The flashing blue lights outside painted the interior in waves of guilt and regret. He had dreamed of being recorded, yes, but not like this, not as a criminal. He sat in silence as a car moved through the London streets. The officer beside him, Officer Chen didn't speak for the first few minutes. She didn't need to. Her calm presence, her steady breathing, said everything Marcus didn't want to hear. When she finally spoke, her tone was soft but firm. "You know, young man, that chain stun of yours could have gone very differently. You're lucky that God knew restraint." Marcus stared down at his trembling hands. "It was just a prank," he muttered. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone." Officer Chen raised an eyebrow, glancing at him briefly. "A prank? You tried to loop a chain around the neck of a royal guard on duty. That's not a prank in this country. That's assault." The word hit him like a slap. Assault. He wanted to argue, to say it wasn't fair, that he wasn't that kind of person, but deep down, he knew he had crossed a line he didn't even understand. When the car pulled into the station yard, Marcus's heart was thudding so loud it drowned out the sound of the siren fading behind them. He was led into a gray-walled building that smelled faintly of paper and rain. Everything was efficient, procedural. His phone, wallet, and coins were sealed in a plastic bag. His fingerprints pressed onto a scanner. His name was entered into a system he wished he'd never met. Finally, he was seated in a small interview room under the cold hum of fluorescent lights. The clock ticked louder than it should have. Then the door opened, and a man stepped in holding a cup of tea. Detective Thomas Bradley mid-50s. Calm eyes that looked both tired and wise. The kind of man who'd seen far too many bad decisions disguised as youthful impulses. He set the tea down gently in front of Marcus. "Drink. You'll need it." Marcus hesitated, then took the cup. His hands shook as steam curled between them. The detective sat opposite him, flipping through a file. "So, Marcus," he began, 24 years old, visitor from Eastern Europe, here on a tourist visa, works in a warehouse back home, and today decided to prank a member of the Royal Guard. Does that sound about right?" Marcus nodded weakly. "Why?" the detective asked. The question was simple, but it sliced deep. Marcus swallowed. "I wanted to go viral. I saw videos online, people pranking guards, getting millions of views. They looked harmless. Funny. I thought," his voice cracked, "I thought if I did something bigger, people would notice me." Detective Bradley leaned back in his chair, watching him for a long moment. Then he sighed and said something Marcus would never forget. The internet's full of ghosts, son. People chasing attention that disappears faster than the upload bar finishes. You know what they never show? The aftermath. The jobs lost, the families disappointed, the jail time. You think fame will fix your life, but you end up trading your dignity for 15 seconds that vanish before you can even breathe. Marcus looked down. A tear splashed onto his hand. I didn't think it would go this far. Most people don't, the detective said quietly, but intent doesn't erase consequence. He pulled out his tablet and turned it toward Marcus. News headlines glowed across the screen. Stories of influencers who'd gone too far. A man who had fallen to his death filming a rooftop stunt. Another who'd gone to prison after terrifying a woman in the name of comedy. Each headline felt like a mirror showing Marcus his own reflection. Naive, desperate, blind to the cost. Detective Bradley let the silence stretch. Then he spoke again, his tone shifting from stern to almost fatherly. You're lucky, Marcus. That guard could have reacted differently. He had every right to see you as a threat. But he didn't. He showed restraint, even mercy. You owe that man more than you realize. Marcus nodded, voice shaking. I know I was stupid. The detective closed the folder. You were foolish, he corrected. There's a difference. Stupidity doesn't learn. Foolishness can. The word settled like an anchor in Marcus's chest. After a pause, the detective stood. You'll be charged. You will have to face a magistrate. But given your cooperation, your record, and your remorse, you might be treated with leniency. The best thing you can do now is be honest, and start learning the lesson you came here to find. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. One more thing, he said without turning around. Don't waste this. Most people don't get the chance to survive their own mistakes. When the door closed, Marcus sat alone for a long time. The tea had gone cold, untouched. He thought of his parents back home, their tired faces, their small apartment, the money they had lent him with hope in their eyes. He thought of James Patterson, still standing outside the palace, as still and strong as a monument. He had tried to humiliate a soldier, and yet it was he who felt stripped bare. That night, in the holding cell, Marcus didn't sleep. He watched the flicker of the security light on the wall, and thought about the detective's words. Maybe this wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was the first time he'd truly been forced to see himself. The fame he had wanted was empty. But maybe, just maybe, the lesson he'd earned was something worth more than all the views in the world. Outside, London slept. Inside, a foolish young man finally began to wake up. 3 days later, Marcus sat on a wooden bench inside a London courthouse. The walls were pale cream, the air cool, the silence heavy. His hands were clasped so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the creak of a chair, the echo of footsteps in the corridor, made his chest tighten. He wasn't handcuffed, but the weight of what was coming felt heavier than any metal chain. His lawyer, Elizabeth Hart, sat beside him, a composed woman in her 40s with an air of calm authority. She had reviewed his case, spoken to the officers, even read the report from the palace. And yet, she knew the odds weren't easy. Assaulting a royal guard, even without intent to harm, was a serious offense. She leaned toward Marcus, her tone low and even. When the magistrate asks you questions, speak honestly. Don't justify, just explain. And if you feel nervous, take a breath before answering. Understand. Marcus nodded. Yes. His voice was barely a whisper. Elizabeth gave a faint smile. Good. Honesty carries more weight here than you think. The doors opened. A court officer called out his name. Marcus Petrov, case number 48B. He rose, his knees trembling, and followed Elizabeth into the chamber. Magistrate Susan Whitmore presided from a bench, an older woman with sharp eyes and the kind of composure that could silence an entire room with a look. To her right sat the clerk, and to her left, a prosecutor who seemed carved from formality itself. Assault on a military officer in the line of duty, the clerk announced. The words echoed through the courtroom like a tolling bell. Marcus stood, head bowed, as a magistrate read the summary of his actions: the chain, the guard, the panic, the arrest. With each line, he felt the sting of his own stupidity deeper. "Do you plead guilty or not guilty?" she asked. His voice cracked. "Guilty, Your Honor." The prosecutor rose first. His tone was measured, professional, but stern. He described the seriousness of the event, how Marcus's actions could have caused panic, endangered palace security, and set a dangerous precedent. This was not a spontaneous act, he argued. It was premeditated. He had a recording device ready. The chain was prepared in advance. While the defendant may claim it was a prank, it constituted a clear physical act of aggression. Marcus swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, to explain, but Elizabeth placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Wait," she whispered. When the prosecutor sat, Elizabeth stood. Her voice was calm, deliberate, yet carried warmth. "Your Honor, this case is indeed serious, but context matters. My client is not a violent man. He is a foolish one, a young man caught in the dangerous illusion of online fame. He has no criminal record, cooperated fully with the authorities, and has expressed genuine remorse. What he did was reckless, not malicious. He believed he was making entertainment, until reality reminded him of its consequences." She paused, glancing at Marcus. He's already paid a heavy price in shame, fear, and the realization that one mistake can undo an entire life. Then she handed the magistrate a document. "This is a statement from Sergeant James Patterson, the Royal Guard involved. I would ask the court to take it into account." Marcus's heart stopped for a moment. He hadn't known about that statement. The magistrate adjusted her glasses and began to read aloud. The courtroom grew still. Sergeant Patterson's words were simple, steady, and unexpected. The incident was serious, yes, but the individual's reaction afterward showed confusion, not malice. He posed no ongoing threat and cooperated immediately. "I believe his actions stem from ignorance, not intent to harm. Discipline should be tempered with understanding." Marcus blinked, tears filling his eyes. The very man he had tried to humiliate was now defending him. Magistrate Whitmore looked up from the page, her expression unreadable. "Sergeant Patterson demonstrates a professionalism we expect of those who serve this country," she said, "and it appears he also understands the value of mercy." She turned her gaze toward Marcus. "Mr. Petrov," she said evenly, "stand." He obeyed, his legs trembling. "You came to this country seeking attention," she continued. "You found consequence. You turned a moment of childish arrogance into a national incident. Yet," she paused, letting the silence stretch, "you have shown remorse. You cooperated fully. You pled guilty without hesitation. And the officer you endangered has chosen to see the humanity in your mistake." Her voice softened slightly, though her authority remained unshaken. "I am sentencing you to a £1,000 fine, a suspended 3-month prison term, and 100 hours of community service to be completed in your home country. You will also be required to leave the United Kingdom within 48 hours and will not be permitted to return for 2 years." Marcus exhaled shakily. He had braced himself for prison, for a future shattered beyond repair. But this was a mercy he hadn't owned. The magistrate wasn't done. "Let this be the moment you start again, Mr. Petrov. You are being given a chance that many never receive. What you do with it will define whether this story becomes your ending or your beginning." Her gavel struck once, echoing like thunder in Marcus's chest. As the courtroom emptied, Elizabeth touched his shoulder. "That statement from Sergeant Patterson," she said softly, "it changed everything. Remember that." Outside, the air felt different. Lighter, but not free. The sky hung gray over the city, and Marcus could feel the eyes of the world still on him. But for the first time, he didn't want attention. He wanted redemption. He would write to the man who had every right to hate him. He would apologize, not for the cameras, not for sympathy, but because it was right. And perhaps, somewhere behind those palace walls, a soldier who had shown mercy might read it, and believe that even the foolish can learn. 2 days later, Marcus stood outside Heathrow Airport with a one-way ticket in his hand. The clouds above London hung low, grey and quiet, as if the city itself were watching him leave. He didn't feel angry. He didn't even feel sad. What he felt was something deeper, something like awakening. In his bag, tucked between his passport and the folded court papers, was a handwritten letter. It was addressed to Sergeant James Patterson. He had written it the night before, alone in his tiny hostel room. The words had come slow at first, hesitant, unsure, but then they flowed. He apologized, not in the hollow, performative way people do when they want forgiveness, but in the trembling, human way of someone who finally understood. He thanked the sergeant for his restraint, for not reacting with anger or violence when he easily could have. He admitted how blind he had been, how consumed by the illusion of online glory. And at the end, he wrote something simple. You showed me that real strength doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just stands still. Marcus left the letter at the palace security office, not expecting a reply. He didn't need one. Writing it was part of his healing. When his plane took off, London disappeared beneath the clouds, but the lesson stayed with him. Back home, reality hit quickly. He faced questions, judgment, and disappointment from his parents. His father's anger was sharp, but underneath it was heartbreak. His mother cried, both from shame and relief that he were home safe. Marcus didn't make excuses. He told them everything, every detail, every regret, every painful truth. And as he spoke, the weight he'd carried since that morning at the palace began to lift. Weeks passed, then months. To complete his community service, Marcus began working at a local youth center. At first, it was just sweeping floors, handing out flyers, doing menial tasks. But one day, the director asked him to speak to a group of teenagers about responsibility. Nervous, Marcus stood before them and told his story, the real version, not the viral fantasy he once dreamed of. He talked about fame, foolishness, and how one thoughtless act could shatter everything. He told them about the God who could have destroyed him but instead showed mercy. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Then one of the kids raised a hand and said quietly, "You messed up, but you learned. That's cool." That moment changed him more than any punishment could. From then on, Marcus spoke regularly, at schools, youth events, and even online. But this time, his videos weren't about tricks or views. They were about truth, about learning to be seen for who you are, not what you do for attention. He started a small blog, writing about his journey. Slowly, people began to read. Some commented, others shared. A few even thanked him for making them think before chasing internet fame. 2 years passed quietly. Marcus's life was no longer loud, but it was meaningful. Then one morning, an email arrived. The sender's name stopped his breath, James Patterson. Marcus opened it slowly. The message was short, but each line hit deep. Marcus, I read about your work with young people. I'm glad you turned something foolish into something good. True strength isn't about never falling. It's about standing up after you do. If you ever return to London, you have an open invitation to visit Buckingham Palace as a guest, not a troublemaker. Sergeant Patterson. Marcus read it 3 times before realizing he was crying. Not from guilt this time, but from gratitude. He sat back in his chair and smiled for the first time in a long while. The boy who had once tried to choke a symbol of discipline had found freedom in humility. He had learned that sometimes the most powerful moments in life don't happen when we get what we want, but when we face what we've done. The man who had once gasped for breath now breathed easily. He had discovered that redemption is not given, it's built, one honest day at a time. And somewhere, across the sea, a royal guard stood at his post, unflinching as ever, knowing that even in silence, compassion can save a life. So, what do we take from this story? Sometimes, the world glorifies the wrong kind of fame, the kind built on shock, humiliation, or empty laughter. But true courage, true greatness, it's found in restraint, forgiveness, and the quiet strength of those who choose empathy over ego. Marcus learned that one foolish act doesn't define who you are, how you rise after it does. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect before you scroll away. Maybe share it with someone who's chasing the wrong kind of spotlight. And if you believe in real stories, real lessons, and real emotion, Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss the next one. Because sometimes a single story can remind us that being human is the bravest thing of all.